All right, my friends, we finally did it. We finished up this image application. Now, it took a pretty good amount of time, but I think you'll agree with me that we learned a lot about React. In this video, I want to do a quick overview on some of the big things that we covered, and then we'll go to a couple exercises in the next section. So we're going to first start off with the first component we put together, the search bar. Inside of here, we learn more about event handlers. Remember, with an event handler, we will take, say, an input tag or a form tag. We will pass in a callback function to a very specifically named prop. Then whenever that tag or that element emits that event, our callback function will be called. One huge issue that we ran into around these callback functions was the value of this inside them. And as you saw by one of the later errors that we ran into inside the app component, this is an issue that is not going to go away. It's something that you always have to be aware of because it's going to rear its ugly head, so to speak, on just about every project you work on. Remember, in general, the rule to keep in mind, anytime you have a callback function, just to be safe, you can use this arrow syntax like so, or the arrow function syntax. That's going to automatically bind this function and make sure that it always has the appropriate value of this inside of it. The next thing that we covered with our search bar component was that with the prop system, we only communicate from a parent down to a child. That eventually ended up being an issue because we wanted to communicate this search term from the search bar up to the parent function, or the parent component, the app component in this case. So in order to communicate from a child to a parent, we pass a callback from the parent to the child, and then the child will call that callback. Identical system to what we are doing with these event handlers down here. All right, so the next thing we ran into was inside of our imagelist.js file. We learned a little bit more about how to render images, or render lists. So the key thing to keep in mind here is the map function from JavaScript. Every time you want to render a list, you're probably going to be reaching for that map function. Anytime we make a list, we always have to define, maybe not have to, but highly recommended to define a key on the root element that we are rendering into that list. In general, we want to use a key that has a value that is consistent and unchanging for each record between re-renders. And so if you're ever working with data that has an ID property, you're almost always going to use the ID of each record as the key property. Then the last thing we spoke about was inside the image card. We got a pretty good introduction to the ref system. Remember, anytime that we want to reach into the DOM and interact with some individual element, we're going to create a ref inside the constructor, and then we will wire it up to an individual element by passing it as a ref property. Then later on, we can access that ref and get a handle on the actual DOM node. As a quick reminder, can't say it enough, remember these are JSX tags right here. This is not HTML. So we can't just somehow maintain a reference to this JSX element. We have to make use of the ref system if we ever want to interact with an actual DOM element. And then finally, we learned a little bit about the grid CSS system. Now, I'll be honest with you, understanding the grid CSS system, totally not a requirement whatsoever. Grid CSS is extremely new, still undergoing changes, so we didn't really do a deep dive on it because it's just not super important to have a super solid grasp on it just yet. Introducing the grid system was just kind of more of a little bit of an excuse so that we could figure out how to use this ref stuff and figure out how to reach into the DOM and get the image height and whatnot. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this application. We still have a ton more stuff to work on. So let's take a quick pause right here, and we'll continue in the next section.